That's a fantastic story. All right, we're now taking again. High-level takeaways, right? I believe Nephi was a temple man. I think he tells us that from the very beginning of the record, having known the goodness and mysteries of God. And I think we just have not focused on that piece of what he's saying. And I think that a kind of temple experience is described in 1 Nephi 8. And I think the same kind of temple experience is described in different ways in the Sermon on the Mount, but they have some interesting commonalities that tend to suggest it's the same temple experience. You're approaching the tree of life, you're approaching the dwelling place of God to become a divine person, to have joy. And at the climax of that, you pass through a straight and narrow path or gate and enter into the presence of the tree of life, right? That's all in the scriptures. 2 Nephi 9 and a number of Book of Mormon passages, plus some hints in the Sermon on the Mount and the Mount of Transfiguration and elsewhere, suggest that the story that was told around that ordinance, the myth that went with the rite, okay, I don't mean myth in the sense of a false thing, but the story was the garden story. It was Adam and Eve, right? Now, one thing, all of this sort of tracks really well, and it lays nicely over a simple map of the basics of Solomon's temple and the tabernacle as described in the Old Testament, with one glaring exception, which is the tree appears to be in the wrong place. Because in the tabernacle and in 2 Chronicles 3-4 and in 1 Kings 6-7, where Solomon's temple is described, there is definitely a tree, 7-branch menorah, and it appears to be, it's very clearly in the center of the three rooms, in room 2 of 3. Whereas Nephi and Matthew put it, it appears to be in the third room. It's behind a straight and narrow passage. It's beside the rock. It's beside the water for Matthew. For both of them, beside the waters. For Matthew, it's in the kingdom of God. That seems to say it's in the third and final room. What gives, right? What gives? Tonight is the answer to what gives. I think I have an answer, and it is. The answer is going to have to do with Isaiah, principally. Now, this is not a quote from Isaiah. It's a quote from 2 Kings 18:4, which describes King Hezekiah's reforms. So, of the kings of Judah, according to the Old Testament record, they were all wicked, basically, except 2. Those are Hezekiah and Josiah, and they are described as great reformers. They came up and they set us back on the path of righteousness. This according to the Old Testament as we have it. Okay?
Except for they have the book, right?
This is Josiah, who was about 100 years after Hezekiah.
Okay.
And the accounts are slightly different between Kings and Chronicles, but
Josiah was
in connection with him, there's a book which is probably Deuteronomy.
Okay,
right?
so this is 100 years after.
This is 100 years earlier. This is the time of Isaiah. Okay, Isaiah and Hezekiah are contemporaries.
Okay.
So 2 Kings 18:4 says this about Hezekiah's reforms. He removed the high places, broke down the images, cut down the groves. Yesterday we mentioned the fact that there had been a brass serpent in the temple somewhere. We don't know where. Hezekiah is apparently the one who removed it. Here's a description of Hezekiah's, sort of the heart of Hezekiah's actions. Now this word, the groves, is interesting because what it actually translates is the Asherah. The Asherah. Hezekiah cut down the Asherah. And Josiah, who was the reforming king in Lehi's time, a century later, is also said to have removed the Asherah from the temple and to have taken out the vessels for Asherah and burned it all and stamped it into the mud in the brook. So that these two men, the heart of their heroic story is that they destroyed the Asherah. Now, the editors of the Old Testament are so pleased with Hezekiah that verse 4 says, "There was never a king again as good as him. He was the very best," okay, for having done this. Now, so what is the Asherah, or who is it? Well, this is pretty easy to find some, the internet's great. You can find some basic scholarship very easily, right? Asherah is one of probably several names applied to the Mediterranean, the Near Eastern goddess, the goddess, okay? Her great symbol is a tree, but she's not especially a goddess of trees or fertility goddesses. At Ugarit, which is a little earlier than Israel and geographically very close, just up the coast. So it's thought to be a very closely related kind of cultural relative. She was called Elat, which is simply the goddess. She was the goddess, okay? And she appears actually multiple times in the Old Testament, but her name is in the King James text is always translated as something else. So you wouldn't, if you search Asherah, it's not there. There's a Bible dictionary note. Okay, she's translated as the groves or the green trees, and always in a negative context. So now, by the way, Jeremiah, when he talks about the Queen of Heaven, probably is talking about Asherah. Okay, probably. Now, several things indicate to us that Asherah was very popular from the time of Isaiah through the time of Lehi. First of all, the fact that these reforming kings are described as attacking her, right? Because if there is not a popular belief in the goddess, no one's going to waste their time going after her. No one's going to bother writing a record saying, yeah, we got her, right? So she must have been popular just from the text. But also her name has showed up in archaeology. These are famous. Some of you may have heard of these. Kuntilet Adrud is an archaeological site in Sinai. It's like a caravanserai or a fortress. And on a potsherd, a big fragment of pottery, there are some pictures. And they debate what are these pictures of, but the text says Yahweh of Teman and his Asherah. So that Yahweh is connected with Asherah, right? Not as a foreign goddess or hostile, but here they are together. Maybe they're being pictured in the picture, maybe not. But in the text, they're together. Kirbet El Kom is in the West Bank. There's a tomb. The archaeological site is a tomb. It's a tomb of a guy named Uriah. And on the wall of Uriah's tomb, it says, "Blessed be Uriah by Yahweh and his Asherah." There's a sort of magical hand diagram that goes with the graffiti. So there's text outside the Old Testament that says, hey, at least some people who worship Yahweh saw Asherah as a companion and not necessarily as a hostile force.
Well, there's more, there are so many more mentions of Asherah or figurines of Asherah than there's David or any other kind of Old Testament.
There's way more archaeology than any of the kings.
Asherah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of figurines, in late 7th century, so we're talking about the time of Lehi,
Mm-hmm.
okay, in the time of Lehi's life, we have found hundreds of what are called Judean pillar figurines. They are these, okay? They're little, and they are almost certainly, there's no writing on them, there's this. But they're almost certainly a statue of a goddess, and they are different from the figurines of the nations around. Okay, in this important way, the lower half is a pole, right? The lower half is just a shaft. Ooh, yeah. So first of all, look like in other nations, in your neighbors in near space and time. You have a lower half that's obviously a female lower half with exaggerated hips and so on, right? So two things to think about. One, boy, it doesn't look like a tree. The other thought is, some people say, hey, this tends to suggest that this is a defined figure that is female, but whose femaleness is more focused on or communicated in her nurturing motherly nature rather than her sexual nature. Okay, this is a figurine of a mother goddess, probably Asherah. So now we've actually, it turns out, encountered Asherah last night a couple times. Allison brought her up once. Let's talk about that. Proverbs 3 is a great passage to look at. Oh, my phone's in my pocket. Proverbs 3. This is a famous passage here.
While you're searching for it, I mean, one of the points that I was making was in terms of relevant time period for archaeology. David is only attested one time.
Yeah.
And
and Josiah is attested none.
None but
times.
Asherah is just, everywhere.
Yeah.
Solomon, exact same thing. I mean, it's very hard to find any kind of in the right time period mention of Solomon.
Right.
400 years later, yes.
Right.
But
If you were researching this place on the basis of archaeology alone, you would say, look, there's this extremely popular goddess.
Yeah.
And you would say,
exactly.
there's some kings, we know a couple of names.
Yeah, but
Josiah wouldn't be one of
it
them.
would be.
Hezekiah does show up.
Even Asherah. I mean, it would be,
Yep.
yes.
Okay, so, Vern, you want to read this whole thing for us, 13 to 19, is that where we are? Yeah, 13 to 19.
Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. For the merchandise of it is better than the merchandise of silver, and of the gain thereof than fine gold. She is more popular than rubies, and all the things thou canst desire are not to be compared unto her. Length of days is, okay, I said
Precious, that's an important word.
Yes, precious, sorry.
It is.
I guess I was sort of adding my own political bent to it. Okay, where was I?
You're not reading anymore.
16. Length of days is her right hand, and in her left hand riches and honor. That's interesting. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree, like you showed us, of life to them that lay hold upon her, and happy is everyone that retaineth her. Lord, by wisdom hath founded the earth, by understanding hath he established the heavens.
So, yeah, so this is a terrific passage. A number of things we saw yesterday show up here. You have paths that are peaceable, right? In the same way that I think people receive the title of a shalom, they're a peaceable follower of Christ as they transition forward to the temple. The image of her with blessings in both hands is fascinating when you think about Matthew 6, doing justice and mercy with your right and left hand. And at the end of this path, there is a tree, and she appears to be a divine personage, and she's named Wisdom. She's called Wisdom. Now, there's something here that's a little bit hidden in translation, and Allison brought it up yesterday, but let's just talk about it now. The Beatitude formula appears here. This is not necessarily the first time, but it appears in the Old Testament, and then it's picked up in the Sermon on the Mount and elsewhere, right? Blessed is he who blah, 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 whatever. And so we see that in verses 13 or 14, right at the beginning. It says happy. Yeah. Some translations say blessed. The word here in Hebrew is actually ashrei. Now today I'm going to do something I didn't do yesterday, which is...
So the word for blessed is Asherah, right?
Well,
or happiness.
Close, yeah. So look, here are the words. I'm going to show you some Hebrew words because that's fun. This is the name Asherah. Okay, right here. That's the name Asherah as it appears in the text of the Old Testament. This name is happiness. This word is happiness. And the Beatitude formula in the Old Testament is ashrei, the happiness of the one who gets wisdom, right? Blessed is the one who gets wisdom. So the only difference here, look, the dots are put there by medieval scholars. So really it's the block letters that we can be confident in. And the only difference is between basically this Y on the end, the yod, that's a jot, or this H, which just holds the letter A. Ashrei, Ashrah. So this could, and by the way, a lot of adjective forms end in a Y. So like the name Moroni probably means a guy from the town of Moroni, which there's a city of Moroni in the Book of Mormon, right? So this could be heard or read as belonging to Asherah, the one who belongs to Asherah, as an adjective of Asherah. And secular scholars commenting on this passage say, hey, this is likely a play on words, because what we get at the end of this path is a divine figure who is a tree. And so up at the front, we have this statement that plays on the name of the divine figure, right? Ashrei, the one who finds wisdom. And oh, there it is, there's Asherah. She's the tree.
So they're saying it's chiastic. The scholars say that.
I don't know if it's chiastic, but it's a play on words. In the same way that Adam is made out of earth, and his name is Earth. In the same way that Eve is, her name means the living one. should be provocative in light of yesterday's discussion, right? It's the mother of all living. So there's a pun here where the name of Asherah is flagged up front.
Has any scholar ever considered the Sermon on the Mount a wisdom text?
See, I don't know.
Yes.
And
And I didn't see that in Welsh. He did an introduction of scholarly theories, and wisdom text was one of them, so that's why I'm curious.
so I'm not familiar with that. That's interesting.
It's just in the scholarship on wisdom.
There are
I'm
some
sure
articles or books.
it's named as one of the wisdom passages.
It should be. Because look, in the same way that this is a journey that starts out with the Beatitude formula and ends at a tree, so is the Sermon on the Mount. It starts out with 9 repetitions of the Beatitude formula and ends at the presence of a tree, which means, hey, maybe when we're reading that blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, we should realize that a person doing this in Hebrew would hear echoes of the name Asherah, and then maybe they would be prepared, or maybe they'd be surprised when they came into the presence of the Asherah. By the way, I love kind of looking at word distribution. The word happiness is very common in the Book of Mormon. So when you see phrases like they lived according to the manner of happiness, or we followed the plan of happiness, or I want to be a seeker of happiness, realize that one of the possibilities for what the underlying Hebrew might say could be a play on the name of this goddess. All right, so maybe Asherah is in what we saw yesterday, in that maybe she's in the Sermon on the Mount in the same way that she's in Proverbs 3. But actually, she's much more emphatically in 1 Nephi. So now this, I try to make sure I call out everyone on whom I rely. Daniel Peterson wrote an article, again, I think should be better known, called Nephi and his Asherah, circa, I want to say 1998 or something. It's about 20 years old. And he pointed out something, you can put lots of scholarship and other examples and whatever around it, but the fundamental insight is actually quite simple. So come with me to 1 Nephi 11, and let's take a look at my LDS library app is getting very weird this weekend. Couldn't download the conference talks today in church. It's very embarrassing. I had to borrow someone's phone. All right, Lehi recounts his vision, right? Nephi gives us a couple of chapters of thoughts about things like chapter 9, hey, here's me making the small plates. 10 talks about John the Baptist, and then has a very interesting verse we'll come to at the end. And then 11, he goes out and he gets his own vision. This, by the way, is very common in apocalyptic literature, which is the sort of visionary literature that seems to have sprung up near the end of the Old Testament times and into the New Testament times. Back-to-back visions that explain each other. Okay, and the Book of Mormon has various examples, including Lehi's 2 visions, and these two visions that explain each other. All right, Vern, you did great, but I'm going to ask Julie to read. Julie, you want to read 2 through 13? Let's split that in half. That's kind of long. You want to go, like, say 2 through about 8?
Sure.
Okay.
And the Spirit said unto me, Behold, what desireth thou?
So sorry, this is Nephi recounting his vision now.
Desirest thou? And I said, I desire to behold the things which my father saw. And the Spirit said unto me, Believest thou that thy father saw the tree of which he hath spoken? And I said, Yea. Thou knowest that I believe all the words of my father. And when I had spoken these words, the Spirit cried with a loud voice, saying, Hosanna to the Lord, the Most High God. For he is God over all the earth, yea, even above all. And blessed art thou, Nephi, because thou believest in the Son of the Most High God. Wherefore thou shalt behold the things which thou hast desired. And behold, this thing shall be given unto thee for a sign, that after thou hast beheld the... No, that's reminiscent of other ones. That after thou hast beheld the tree which bore the fruit, which thy father tasted, thou shalt also behold a man descending out of heaven. And him shall you witness. And after ye have witnessed him, ye shall bear record that it is the Son of God. And it came to pass that the Spirit said unto me, Look. And I looked and beheld a tree. And it was like unto the tree which my father had seen. And the beauty thereof was far beyond, yea, exceeding of all beauty. And the whiteness thereof did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow.
Fantastic. Doug, would you read for us 9 through 13 then?
And it came to pass that after I had seen the tree, I said unto the Spirit, I behold, thou hast shown unto me the tree which is precious above all. And he said unto me, What desirest thou? And I said unto him, To know the interpretation thereof. For I spake unto him as a man speaketh, for I beheld that he was in the form of a man. Yet, nevertheless, I knew that it was the Spirit of the Lord. And he spake unto me as a man speaketh with another. And it came to pass that he said unto me, Look. And I looked as if to look upon him, and I saw him not, for he had gone from before my presence. And it came to pass that I looked and beheld the great city of Jerusalem, and also other cities, and I beheld the city of Nazareth. And in the city of Nazareth I beheld a virgin, and she was exceedingly fair and white.
So Nephi says, I want to know what my father saw, right? And his guide in his vision hones in immediately on the tree. Do you believe in the tree? He says, I believe everything that my father told me. And I want to know what and then he sees the tree, right? And how is the tree described?
Beautiful.
Like
Yeah.
talk about
Beautiful and white, right? It is beautiful and white. Verse 8, the beauty was far beyond the whiteness that exceed the whiteness of the driven snow. Nephi says, I don't know what that means. And here's the interpretation is an image. And he sees a virgin, and she is exceedingly fair and white.
I think of white kind of as bright in that context. Kind of.
Maybe shining,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like Matthew 5 says, hey, you will let your light shine.
Or how deities
Or what?
portray, like in the Joseph's vision,
Or the Sermon Mount of Transfiguration,
Yeah.
right? Yep, absolutely. The righteous shine in the kingdom of God. It suggests you, well, it says white and beautiful, but I think shining is a very likely understanding. So, look, the answer somehow to the question has to be, right, that the woman holding the child is somehow the answer to the question, what is the tree with the fruit? Now, we might say, okay, it's just Mary though, right, isn't it? Except what does Nephi say to his brothers Laban and Lemuel in 15:22 when they ask him about the same thing? 4 chapters later, well, 15:21, what meaneth the thing which our father saw in a dream? What meaneth the tree? And I said unto them, it was a representation of the tree of life. So it's not as simple as saying, hey, this is Christ's mortal mother. This is someone who is both a virgin holding with a child, and is also can be credibly called the tree of life. Now, by the way, look at verse 6, chapter 11, verse 6, right? When Nephi says, the question, the Spirit says, verse 4, do you believe that your father saw the tree? I believe everything my father said. Middle of verse 6, blessed art thou, Nephi, right? Right here, probably, in the underlying Hebrew, you got again the Beatitude formula. Oh, your happiness, how great the happiness of you, Nephi, right? Because you're going to see the Son of God ascending and so on. So, suggesting maybe again that Asherah's name shows up there. Now, one more kind of interesting hint that we're taught that this tree is the divine, is a god. The Nephi knows the tree is a goddess. Look at chapter 8, verse 30. We read this before, but I think Dennis read this verse yesterday. But I want to point out something that we didn't touch on yesterday. Okay, people come forward, right? Other multitudes. This is the end of the vision here. They catch hold of the rod and they press forward, holding fast to the rod, until they came forth and fell down and partook of the fruit. In the ancient world, the ancient Near East, to bow was not to do this. You lay flat. The Greeks had a term for it called proskinesis. When you are in the presence of someone who is a god or a priest or a king or someone who is greatly your superior, Herodotus describes this for his Greek audience for the first time, because they're all Democrats, right? They don't believe in this stuff. You lie flat on your belly, right? People approached the tree, they fell down, and then got up and took of the fruit. Suggests that being in the presence of the tree, that they're in the presence not of just an object, but of the presence of a divine person to whom they're bowing. So this is to say, hey, we looked at yesterday, there are some interesting hints that a goddess is present. Now that brings us, which is to say, look, this is kind of a classic kind of painting we usually see, right? We should think of these paintings, maybe, this is the question, as being entering into the presence of a goddess. Not a goddess alone, necessarily, right? But that's how to think of these paintings. So that brings us to Isaiah. All right, so we're going to read Isaiah 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. Now we say lots of things about Isaiah. I think we tend to read him as a prophet of the future, and a prophet of the end times in particular, right? And I think prophecy, any prophecy is multivalent, can mean lots of things. So I'm not suggesting that's not the case. But I want to read Isaiah as an eyewitness to things that happened in his day. Because I think that's actually part of what he's telling us, is he's observing things that happened in his day, and in particular during the reign of King Hezekiah. So we're going to look at just 4 chapters. Interestingly, these are 4 chapters that Nephi includes, right? Chapters 2 through 14 of Isaiah's record go in 2nd Nephi. Now here's the structure. I'll tell you up front, and then we'll kind of read it together and talk about it. And we're going to do a little more Hebrew today than yesterday, okay? Because I think the translation here hides more things. 3 and 4 are a kind of call and response. There's a crisis, and then something is done to respond to the crisis. And then I think 5 and 6 are very similar. There's a crisis, it's really, I think, the same crisis, and a response. So that then 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 echo each other. So I think all 4 chapters back to back are describing effectively the same thing. Okay? So we got to Matt, right? Okay, so Isaiah 3. Here's my phone. Keep misplacing my scriptures. All right, Isaiah 3, and that's no, that has like 15 verses or something, doesn't it? If you would read, say the first 6 verses for us.
Verse 6, Isaiah 3. For behold, the Lord of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread and the whole stay of water, the mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet and the prudent and the ancient, the captain of 50 and the honorable man and the counselor and the cunning artificer and the eloquent orator. And I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. And the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. When a man shall take hold of his brother of the house of his father, saying, Thou hast clothing, be thou our ruler, and let this ruin be under thy hand.
That's excellent. Look, society is, I'm not going to comment line by line in every verse, but this is a picture of a society that's lost its leadership, right? It's corrupt at the top. Who is missing? The military leader, right? The best craftspeople, the wise advisors, the great speakers, the princes, that's who's in default. Society's leaders. There are a couple of interesting terms here, and these are part of what signals that 3 and 4 are connected, okay? Bread is missing. Verse 1, God has taken away bread. Now we're going to see some more in a minute. Verse 6, then, we come to kind of an attempt to solve the leadership crisis. You take a brother in the house of the father and say, hey, you rule us, okay? And Dion, if you would read, say, verses 7 through 10.
In that day shall he swear, saying, I will not be an healer, for in my house is neither bread nor clothing. Make me not a ruler of the people. For Jerusalem is ruined, and Judah is fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory. The shew of their countenance doth witness against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom. They hide it not. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. Say ye to the righteous, that it shall be well within him, for they shall eat the fruit of their doings.
Okay. So a couple points here. So to sort of summarize the crisis, some of the key words, there's an absence of bread, leadership is corrupt, or in default fails, right? We try to make this guy be our leader, and he says, I can't because I don't have clothing, I don't have bread, so clothing and bread are both missing. But verse 10, the righteous are promised that the fruit will still be accessible to them, right? Do notice here, verse 9, which says that Judah, these corrupt leaders, declare their sin as Sodom, they hide it not. We're going to come back to this. I don't think this has anything to do with homosexuality at all. I think it means something quite specific. Just notice it, because we're going to come back to it in like 20 minutes. Okay?
Are these things all symbolic? Because it seems like we're using a lot of these same images as symbols in other parts of the scripture.
Yeah. So,
So is this a spiritual lack of spiritual leadership,
yeah.
spiritual bravery, being on the path of righteousness? It's not there, and even our leaders admit they're not doing it anymore.
Yeah. I like that. There's really, I think there's a lot of force to that. I also think there are some really specific and physical things that are going to be described, especially in chapter 5. So I think the answer is yes, and. So hold on to that thought. Dion, thank you for that. So Brian, right? Brian and Jamie. Brian, would you read verses, what the heck? My phone's doing, I don't even know what it's doing now. We're up to 11 now, right?
Yep.
You want to read, say, 11 to 15 for us, and then Jamie, I'll have you, well, that's the long end of the chapter. We'll have you read some of the last bit. 11 to 15.
Sure. Woe unto the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hand shall be given him. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. The Lord standeth up to plead, and standeth to judge the people. The Lord will enter into judgment with the ancients of his people, and the princes thereof. For ye have eaten up the vineyard, the spoil of the poor is in your houses. What mean ye that ye beat my people to pieces, and grind the faces of the poor, saith the Lord God of hosts.
Fantastic. So here, God judges these people, right? They're wicked, they're condemned by God. Let's see, Jamie, if you just read, like, let's say the next three verses, and then we'll just sort of summarize the rest there.
Moreover, the Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are haughty, and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, and making a tinkling with their feet. Therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. In that day the Lord will take away the bravery of their tinkling ornaments about their feet, and their cause, and their round tires like the moon.
Awesome. And then there's a bunch more verses about all the other kinds of, it's an elaborate description of their apparel, right? Things they're wearing that'll be taken away. Now, conventional commentary goes something like this. Hey, the leadership in Judah was in crisis. The military leaders and the great statesmen and the artificers, and also all the women. And I don't believe it. Because I think this is the description of a single crisis, and I don't believe it's, hey, these few men and all the women, which suggests that the daughters of Zion are some kind of leadership. They're some kind of elite in the.
They're led by women, doesn't it?
Led by women, yeah, that was one of the little phrases.
Yeah. So, so you're talking about the princes are babes? Yeah. So it suggests that they are some kind of elite. Now look, it's really interesting if you look up the phrase daughter of Zion. Just in Isaiah, in fact, just in the first 2/3 of Isaiah, that almost everybody, no matter how skeptical they are, think were written by the same guy. Okay? The phrase daughter of Zion comes up meaning something that seems very clearly to be a divine being. The mountain in Jerusalem, the mountain of Zion, belongs to the daughter of Zion. Not to the daughters, to the daughter of Zion. She's described as being the virgin, a protectress, a goddess over Jerusalem. Well, that's interesting, right? If there's a daughter of Zion, that's some kind of female, the mountain is hers. Who are daughters of Zion, plural, who have an elaborate description of their clothing? It seems to suggest someone who's a priestess, right? So it seems to suggest that there's that the crisis that is infected sort of the other more secular leadership, that maybe that there is a female order of priesthood that has also been corrupted, right? From the point of view of God, point of view of Isaiah, right? And they're going to be punished. It'd be interesting to see what these ornaments all look like, because it kind of feels to me like this is a description or possibly a parody of something these women would actually presumably wear, right? This is not a key part of my thought here. It's just I don't believe this means that also all the women of Jerusalem were wicked. All right, so we get to Isaiah 4, and Dennis, if you would read. Isaiah 4 is short. If you could read the first 3 verses for us.
And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, We will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel, only let us be called by thy name, to take away our reproach. In that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely, for them that are escaped of Israel. And it shall come to pass that that he that is left in Zion, and he that remaineth in Jerusalem, shall be called holy, even everyone that is written among the living in Jerusalem.
So, look, verse 3 describes a crisis in which there's no bread and there's no clothing. Hey, can you be a leader? No, I have no bread, no clothing. I can't be the healer, right? But the righteous are promised. For the righteous, they'll still be able to eat the fruit. Verse 4 is a response, right? Chapter 4 is a response. 7 women take hold of a man and say, no, look, we'll provide you the clothing and we'll provide you the bread, right? We just need you to bear the name for us. And then verse 2 says that the escaped will be able to eat the fruit, right? The promise to the righteous in chapter 3 is extended again, or maybe fulfilled in chapter 4. The escaped of Israel will eat the fruit. What is, by the way, the image of 7 women should be really interesting, right? Of course, when I was a kid, I heard this described as prostate polygamy, by dread with some and by delight with delight by others, right? There will come a day, 7 to 1. I am not convinced. What else might a group of 7 women or a 7-fold woman, a woman in 7 parts, what else might that be?
Menorah?
Yeah, the menorah, right? The menorah is the great tree in the temple. It's got 7 branches, and if I'm right, then it is the tree in 1 Nephi 8. And when Nephi says, "What is the tree? I want to see the tree," he sees a woman, right? That's a woman that is also a 7-branched lamp. So maybe maybe when we hear 7 women, we should think of the menorah, of the goddess, of the Asherah, of the tree of life, or maybe we should think of a quorum of 7 women who constitute her or something. Okay, but I'm not convinced of polygamy. Verses 4 to 6, it's Diane, right? Diane, not Dion. Okay.
When the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, and shall have purged the blood of Jerusalem from the midst thereof by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. And the Lord will create upon every dwelling place a Mount Zion, and upon her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day, and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For upon all the glory shall be a defense. And there shall be a tabernacle for a shadow in the daytime from the heat, and for a place of refuge, and for a covert from storm and from rain.
Thank you. A cloud and smoke by day, and the shining of a flaming fire by night. What does that suggest? That's the Exodus, right? That's the presence of God or his messenger that led the Israelites where they should go. The vision of Isaiah here, the writing of Isaiah, has God saying, look, I will send that presence to every dwelling place on Mount Zion, places where people live. Here's what I think. Let me put these pieces together and tell you what I think is being said here, okay? It's not just that leadership is corrupt, it's that the temple leadership is corrupt. And so we take hold of our brother in the house of the Father. This is a priestly figure, where we need someone to be, maybe it's to be the Melchizedek priest, maybe it's to be the ruler of the temple, right? But that guy is inadequate. He lacks bread, which is a symbol of the flesh of Christ, of God, right? He lacks clothing, which is the symbol of the priesthood, and also of the flesh of the Lord. He's inadequate to the task. He can't do it.
Is it meaning he's unworthy, so he can't step in and do the priest things?
I think surely it does not mean that they didn't have clothing, right? It must really mean
Yeah.
he's unworthy, right?
Okay.
And I think also his female counterparts, whatever their role is, are also unworthy. But there's hope, okay? The 7 women step in and provide the deficit. We just need someone to bear the name, right? Which suggests to be the Lord, right? To be the Melchizedek priest. And the righteous will still be able to eat the fruit of Zion. Now, or it's still going to eat the fruit. Now then this verse is fascinating in that context because it suggests a pilgrimage, right? An exodus from a corrupted temple into private homes. Is that nuts? Well, it turns out that's the scenario of Alma 32. Because Alma's talking to the poor of the Zoramites, and we think about this as being a discussion of faith, right? Plant a seed, it will grow. But the question that the Zoramite poor ask Alma is not, how do I have faith? The question is, I have been thrown out of the building. How do I worship God if I've been thrown out of the building? And the answer is, yes, plant a seed of faith, but the answer is the path to the tree of life is still open to you. Chapter 32 ends with the appearance of the tree of life, right? Which I think is maybe an interesting analogy here. Hey, the physical building of the temple is corrupt, but there is a restoration of priesthood, and true worship will continue outside of the main building.
When was this?
So exactly we don't know, but the reign of Isaiah, the ministry of Isaiah is late 8th century. So I have to look up exact dates, but you're talking like Uzziah and Hezekiah, like 730 to 720, kind of in there, BC.
Yeah.
All right, so that's 3 and 4, which I think
before
are
I leave that, so
yeah.
and I'm trying to recall, so as I have kind of read kind of archaeology from this period, a lot of the focus has become less upon this myth of what the elite were supposedly doing in this centralized temple, which they have, doubts that a lot of that stuff occurred.
Plus, it's very hard to excavate.
Yeah, and then certainly the idea that there's more temples spread around, but this idea of kind of this elite movement versus
Yeah.
The folk religion.
what occurred in the homes and what
Yeah.
was you know, the average, villager's religious observance like, it wasn't
Yeah.
like what is described in, Chronicles where you're,
Sure.
you know,
Which is from the point of view of a literary and powerful elite, and is idealized, because really it's saying this is what you are supposed to do, which implies people aren't doing it.
and you're reading Isaiah kind of along those same lines, and so they point to Amos as a good book of, that's more representative of what we find in
A
archaeology.
shepherd out in the.
What you're arguing here is what you would find in archaeology too, which is, a lot of emphasis on, 98% of Israelites never got to Jerusalem ever. And,
I think that's probably right. I think if you make a distinction between the elite and the folk, I think Isaiah is probably the elite, in the sense that I think he's literate, he's attached to the court.
right.
Now, is the man Isaiah who wrote the book the same as the man who appears in Kings? I don't know.
But he's
Right.
arguing that for the legitimacy of the folk over the elite.
In the sense that, what I think this is saying is that, hey, the people who control the temple are corrupt and what they are doing
Right.
is inadequate in the eyes of God. And we must continue to do what we did before outside the temple. Yeah.
I'm kind of seeing a little bit of a larger pattern, but of an institution growing corrupt and a smaller group of people taking it to like the house churches.
So
I mean, are we seeing this, we saw this in the early church, Christian church, right? One could
It's the
say that
Lehi
we're
maneuver.
seeing that now, I'm not saying the
Yes,
church is
be
corrupt, but yes, all of these,
Jaredites,
there's some
yes.
pattern after pattern of the institution
Yeah.
not leading the people in the paths of righteousness.
So I think this
Kings
is,
do that a lot.
Yes.
yeah. I think, so just pull one thing out of what you're saying, which is much bigger than this one point, but I think this is one reason why Nephi looks at Isaiah and sees himself. Is because he's not looking at a bunch of prophecies about the end days. Sure, that stuff maybe is there, right? He prophesies about the restoration of 12 tribes and stuff, but I think he sees the guy who is the leader of a persecuted prophetic minority, right?
Has a lot riding on his shoulders.
Just like Lehi. There was big that, if I'm reading this right, Isaiah hid, Lehi fled, right? Yeah, I think Unique used to call this the Lehi maneuver. Of Abraham too, lech lecha, get up and get going. When things are bad, withdraw, right?
Survive.
Survive, carrying on the flame. A lot of Isaiah is written to a remnant, to people who were left, who were the true believers. Let me show you Isaiah 5 and 6, okay? So I will tell you, Isaiah 5, when I first sort of read it with new eyes 7-8 years ago, it made me cry. But I think I'm over my crying. I won't cry today.
Darn.
Camera though.
Yeah, well, that's why I won't cry. I never cry. I'm way too manly to do that. So, Allison, if you would read, well, actually, just start by reading verse 1, and then I'll have you read the rest of. I'll sort of read some more in a minute.
Okay. Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill.
Okay, awesome. So look, I think that 3 and 4 are a call and response for 2 reasons. One is because the situation is set up and then there's a response. Scene and sequel, we would say in the novelist's jargon, okay? But also because the language echoes. Bread, clothing, fruit, bread, clothing, fruit. We're going to see a similar language echo. Here's the first word here. The first word, it says, is it let me sing or may I sing?
Let's see.
Now let me sing. It turns out that word is Asherah. And let me show you in the Hebrew, so you doubt me not. This is Asherah, the name of the goddess. This is the first word of Isaiah 5. Asherah. The only difference in unpointed Hebrew is a jot. It's a yod. There's a little y. Okay? This sheer in the middle is sing. Ah makes it me. I sing. This ah is the h on the end. The hey on the end is you're exhorting yourself. Now may I sing. Now let me sing. Okay? About as close to the name Asherah as you can get. Now, if you read verses 2 to 4 for us, Allison.
And he fenced it, and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard, that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes.
You want to read verse 5?
5 2, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down.
So, trodden down, by the way, the covenant penalty. That's interesting. The vineyard has a history in Israelite symbolism of being a reference to the temple. In First Enoch in Matthew, it shows parables about a vineyard, which are clearly references to the temple. In the second temple, the one Herod built, there was a golden vine over the door. We don't know whether there was such a vine in the first temple. Maybe there was. Maybe that's where this imagery comes from. Maybe this is a temple that has angered God by bringing forth wild grapes. Okay, maybe. Kathy, would you read verses 6 to 10 for us?
And I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. Woe unto him of them that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. In mine ears, saith the Lord of hosts, of a truth many houses shall be desolate, even great and fair, without inhabitant. Yea, 10 acres of vineyard shall yield one bath, and the seed of an homer shall yield an ephah.
So, just a couple kind of notes here. The rooms, the second and the third room in Solomon's temple are described sometimes as tents. They're also sometimes as houses, the outer and the inner house. So there's an interesting possibility that joining house to house is about the confusion of sacred space. Okay, and we're gonna see what I mean here in just a few minutes. Verse 10. This may be sort of a little beyond the nutty edge of speculation, but it's just worth noting. Okay, so there's clearly an image of sterility here, right? The land is no longer fruitful. But it says, the verse says, 10 acres shall yield one bath. Well, bath is a measure of volume, but also it's the word that means daughter. Okay, exactly the same word, a bat, as in, for example, the name Bathsheba, okay, which is the daughter of the oath, or the daughter of 7. That's an interesting kind of provocative possibility. Okay. So she'll yield one daughter. And then it says, and the seed of a homer, again, that's a measure of volume, shall yield an ephah. Well, an ephah is literally the same spelling as the word where, and is awfully close to the word zero, or nothing, or void. Now, look, this is sort of risk being a little bit of an excursion. There are 2 words for priest in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, Cohen, right? Everybody's heard this is the Cohen, and the other one is Kamar. And usually, when the word Kamar appears in the King James, the translators insert the word idolatrous. This is an idolatrous priest. So when Josiah comes along, our great hero, and he reforms Israel, and he cuts down the Asherah, and he kills a lot of people, he puts down all the Kamarim, and the King James says the idolatrous priest. We have no special reason to think they're idolatrous other than that Josiah didn't like them. And the Syriac version of the Bible, which is sort of after the Hebrew and the Greek, the Syriac is a language related to Hebrew. It's a kind of Aramaic. It's sort of the third oldest version of the Old Testament. It contains some interesting old variations that are telling. The Syriac Bible refers to Melchizedek in Genesis 14 as a Qumran, which is the same word as the Hebrew Kamar, right? So, what's the point? Well, the word Homer is awfully close to Kamar. And so, there's an interesting sort of suggestion here that the sterility being described as the sterility of priesthood. We're down to just one bat, just down one daughter, and the seed of the Kamarim have come to nothing. Right? All right, verses 11 to 15. Dennis, can you read those for us?
Sure.
Actually, if you read 11 to 17, then I will read the three after that.
Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, that continue until night, till wine inflame them. And the harp, and the viol, and the tabret, and pipe, and wine are in their feasts. But they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands. Therefore, my people are gone into captivity, because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dry up with thirst. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory, and their multitude, and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. And the mean man shall be brought down, and the mighty man shall be humbled, and the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. Then shall the lambs feed after their manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat.
So I think this echoes a little bit with yesterday's discussion in that someone entering by the approved path into the Holy of Holies has a feast with God. Here, the wicked have a feast, but they regard not God, therefore hell, the alternative to the straight and narrow gate, is going to swallow them up. And then afterwards, the lambs shall feed again. A true and righteous feast will be restored. All right, I've deliberately engineered this coming around to me for these next three verses, okay, because I want to read these.
But you're not going to cry.
And I am not going to cry. I am very manly. This is I think,
Back to woes.
yes. This is, I think, the pivotal moment of Isaiah's testimony, and we're gonna jump to a couple of the verses to see kind of what he means. Verse 18: Woe to them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin, as it were, with a cart rope. So, imagine an eyewitness testimony here, okay? People are pulling, wicked people Isaiah does not approve of, are pulling something with ropes. So something big, right? They're dragging it with ropes. Verse 19, that say, let him make speed and hasten his work, that we may see it. And let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come, that we may know it. All right. The word counsel in Hebrew is this word right here, etzah. This word right here, etz, means tree. Now these second letters are actually the same. The letter is tzadi. At the end of a word, it has a different shape. But these first two letters are identical. Etzah has a letter on the end. It's a sort of a silent H. It holds the letter A, etzah. Okay? By the way, at least once in the Old Testament, in Jeremiah 6, I think, this word appears, and the translator said, well, this only makes sense if it refers to forests, so they wrote in forest. So this apparently sometimes can mean trees too. Okay, but this is a tree, this is counsel. He said when you stick that A, that hey is the letter, and there's a vowel with A sound, on the end of something, it can do a couple things. One thing is it can indicate possession. It means hers. So in other words, you could see this written in a sentence, and it could mean literally her tree. Her tree. Etzah, counsel, or her tree. Also, a lot of feminine nouns, where you've got something that exists in masculine and feminine counterparts, and often the feminine is indicated with this letter on the end. This is true of like horse. Horse is sus. Susa is a mare, right? There's a pun on this in the creation account. I will call her woman, for she came out of man. Man is ish, woman is isha. You just put this letter on the end and made it feminine. Which is to say, this could mean her tree or the tree lady. The lady tree. So let's read that again. Let him make speed and hasten his work. In the background, people are pulling something with ropes that we may see it. And let the tree lady of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come, that we may know it. Or really, rather, that we may know her. Now, Vern, can you read Genesis 19 for me? Not the whole thing. What? Genesis 19, verse 5. Genesis 19, verse 5. This is Lot is visited. I said we would come back to Sodom. Okay, this is it. Lot is visited by angels. And a crowd gathers. And let's hear what they say in Genesis 19, verse 5.
And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them.
Oh, bring them out that we may know them.
Is that in the biblical sense?
It is absolutely in the biblical sense.
Okay.
So, look.
Yeah, I've heard a really bad interpretation of that before, so I'm not going to go there.
Yeah. What Isaiah is witnessing is the menorah being removed. It's big. It's being dragged out with ropes. And the cry of the wicked in verse 19 is, hurry up. Let's see this famous tree of the Holy One of Israel. And Isaiah characterized them as saying that we may know her. Right? So this is an assault. This is an attack on a divine being. The sin of Sodom is not being gay. The sin of Sodom is assaulting divine messengers from heaven, right? Specifically sexual assault, if you will, but assaulting an angel. This is why in Isaiah 3 he says, hey, their sin is as Sodom, right? And their sin is as Sodom, they hide it not. They're proud of it, which, by the way, maybe is a commentary on 2 Kings 18:4, right? His sin is as Sodom, he hides it, he's proud of it. He did this horrible thing. He assaulted the divine woman in her temple, dragged her out, exposed her to mockery. For me, Isaiah, it is like a rape. And he's proud of it. Now, verse 20 gives us some interesting corroboration. Verse 20. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. So that's moral dishonesty, right? So you guys are liars. What you say is great is wicked. But now listen to this. That put darkness for light and light for darkness. It put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. That's not calling something different names. That's moving something. Now, put darkness for light and light for darkness. Hey, the great lamp of the temple is the menorah, and it's described by Kings and Chronicles as being in the center, so conventional commentators think that the Holy of Holies was a dark cave. You went into the presence of God and it was all darkness. But Lehi sees it the other way, because Lehi calls to his son Laman and Lemuel in 2 Nephi 1 and says, awake, arise out of the dust, put on the armor of God, and come forth out of obscurity. Come out of the darkness, come forward into the light. Right? Moving the lamp from the Holy of Holies to the central room changes the places of darkness and light. Now, what about this bitter and sweet stuff? Exodus 15. Julie, if you go to Exodus 15 for us. The first part of Exodus 15 is called the Song of the Sea. It's one of the oldest things in the Bible. It's a kind of a creation and God conquers myth, and it's also a temple building song. And then there's a story at the end of it, which on its face doesn't appear to have any connection, but I think it does. And if you read verses 23 to 25 for us.
And when they came to Mara, they could not drink of the waters of Mara,
Mara means bitter, by the way.
for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Mara.
Yep.
And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord shewed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them.
So, the words here in verse 20 are the same as the one in Exodus 15. Mara, bitter, and matok, sweet. And etz, tree. It's all the same words. Moses, in connection with this sort of God founding his temple, there are bitter waters. Moses puts a tree there, shown him by God. The tree sweetens the waters, right? This, by the way, lines up very nicely with the description of waters in Nephi's vision. Because, on the one hand, Nephi says in 1 Nephi 11:25 that the waters are the same thing as the tree. They're the love of God. They're the same as the tree. But when Laman and Lemuel in chapter 15 ask about the waters, he doesn't mention that at all. He says they're a representation of the filthy gulf of hell. Which is to say, we should imagine a river, and where the tree is, the waters are sweet. And where the tree is not, the waters are filthy or bitter. Moving the tree switches filthy, which is bitter and sweet.
Moving the tree being the symbol of taking out the worship, or taking out the knowledge.
I think it's absolutely a description of a physical change. I think when Isaiah says, woe unto those who pull iniquity with a cart rope, I think he's describing, I think we should imagine a physical scene and the cry of workers in a shanty to get them all on time as they're pulling a rope and making crude jokes. And Isaiah is there in despair as great symbol of the Holy of Holies, the tree of life that stands behind the veil, is moved out. Now,
What something would have had to precipitate such a change?
Well,
There had to be a motivation for that.
for sure.
Well, we started with it, we started with Hezekiah's reforms, that's what it was.
And the question is why
It
does
got out of
Hezekiah
control,
reform?
Well, it's just a question of were the reforms, righteous reforms as portrayed in that scripture, or is Isaiah saying they were unrighteous reforms?
Or is it a violent apostasy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, since most of Israel is apostate, you would have to assume that it's, some of the scriptures are probably from that apostate time, and there's tension that goes back and forth. What you're saying is there's tension between Hezekiah and Isaiah here.
Yeah.
So Nephi actually wasn't just interpreting, it wasn't just understanding Lehi's vision, he was having another vision.
In 2 Nephi 11, we'll never know, right?
First
We have
Nephi
the
11.
text.
First
Oh, sorry,
He
first
saw the
Nephi.
filthy waters, but Lehi didn't.
Or we don't have it written,
Oh.
right? So there's that tension. Since all we have is the written account, we don't know for sure what Lehi saw, what he said, but we don't know. To accept, so conventionally at the pulpit, all Christians and Jews, we, big capital we, accept the Old Testament account that Hezekiah and Josiah were reformers in restoring the worship of God.
Political leaders get the right to history.
So it's very difficult to do otherwise because it becomes very tricky to read the scriptures, right?
Mm-hmm.
One, the winners write history, the guys who won. But also two, to accept that, you have to read the account of Josiah in 2 Kings 22 and 23, going and killing people as the act of a righteous man. Now, maybe, right? God does things I don't understand, but he doesn't sound very much like Jesus of Nazareth, who said, turn the other cheek. But we're going to look at some more verses, so hold on with me.
And I want, maybe after the break or something, this vision of Nephi,
Oh yeah.
and it's talking about in all these images of the virgin and the white and all of that. Are we I look at this, and if I don't assume it's the same personage he's speaking of in all cases, I could almost see the mother of Jesus spiritually,
Mhm.
and then the mother of Jesus physically, you know, Mary, and Heavenly Father's wife. I don't know how else to say it. That sounds crude to say. I shouldn't say it that way, but but his spirit came from somewhere. Okay.
And that may be the right interpretation. And then we're on the same page and talking about a nuance, because in either case we're saying, look, there's a divine being here.
Right.
And the question is, where does the divine being start, and where is it Mary, a woman of 1st century BC, right? And that's an interesting conversation.
And I mean, and she's sort of like in that same image, you know, that same vein, or that same. She's a quality person, you know what I'm saying? You always say, well, this was Melchizedek was such a good guy, right? But we're not saying he was a deity. We're saying he's a guy. He's a really good guy. Melchizedek was in the image of, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like it's got that sort of same.
That is a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, not at all.
We are at about an hour and 15 minutes. Is now a good time for a break, or you want?
Sure. You want to take a break?
Well,
So
Well,
let's do
Dennis-
that. I'm not.
Isaiah 5 and 6.
Really quick, what's that a question to, or a comment?
Okay. Yeah. Let's.
Well, my comment was that I think in all of this we learned something about how evil works. And that is they draw out the good, the holy, and they make fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or even in the case of Sodom, they want to do more than just make fun of those angels. They really want to hurt them in a sexual way.
Yeah.
And I think today we see that. It's not enough. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a little organization with 7 billion people on the earth. And yet look at the attention that is given to try to make, you know, I mean, people put the endowment on
On YouTube.
Yes.
it's kind of a crazy thing, but that's kind of how evil works. It's not enough to just disregard it. You have to pound it into insensibility or more.
It just testifies more of its truth because my
So human beings haven't changed a heck of a lot. That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Let me comment on 6 quickly, and then we'll take a pause. We're more than halfway done here. Last night at this point we're halfway done. We're 3/4 maybe here, but let me talk about 6 quickly, and then we'll pause. Okay. 6 is of all these chapters. 6 is the most famous because this is Isaiah's call. Okay. We won't read the first. We'll just read verse 13, but 1 through 4. Hey, clearly we're explicitly in the temple. It's not just that it looks like the temple. Isaiah says, "Hey, I'm in the temple." Right? Who shall I send? Isaiah volunteers. Now, verses 9 through 10 are interesting. Let's see, I just had Vern read. Julie, would you read verses 9 and 10 for us?
And he said, go and tell this people, hear ye indeed, but understand not, and see ye indeed. But be part of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert, and be healed.
So Isaiah volunteers, and he's given a mission, right? A ministry, and he is told, you are not going to be understood, right? Boy, was that true.
To this day.
To this day. Now, we'll come back and comment on that in a minute after a break. Let me just look at verse 13 really quick. Verse 13 is kind of a weird one. Julie, would you read that for us too?
But yet in it shall be a tenth, and it shall return and shall be eaten, as a teal tree and as an oak, whose substance is in them, when they cast their leaves. So the holy seed shall be the substance thereof.
Clear as mud, right?
Like most of Isaiah.
So look, Isaiah 3 and 4. There's an apostasy. Here's the response on the part of God. God responds. And there's an echo in the language of 3 that is repeated in 4. Isaiah 5, there is a bitter apostasy, is an act of rebellion. The first verse of Isaiah 5 starts with the word Asherah. The last verse of Isaiah 6 starts with the word Assyria. This is a tenth. These letters these are the Ayin and the Aleph. They're pronounced almost virtually the same. Assyria, a tenth is very similar sounding to Asherah. It shall be, a tenth shall return. So we have a phonetic echo at the beginning and end of these chapters. Now, if you're thinking, hey, I don't know, that's a tenuous limb, Dave. Okay, but it's tree imagery. It shall be like a teal tree, and it shall be like an oak. Now, look at the words for teal tree and oak. This is the word for teal tree. Without change, it can be read to mean goddess. That's Elah, goddess. Okay, it's the same word as the name Elot, which was Asherah's title at Ugarit. Okay, it shall be a tenth shall return, Assyria shall return, it shall be like Elah, teal tree, or like goddess. It shall be like an oak tree. Oak tree is alone, which is a little more of a fudge, but is awfully close to Elyon. El Elyon.
So this is for Isaiah's ministry, or is he talking about long future away?
So I think, so I don't know what Isaiah thought. I think there was a deep, dark apostasy in Isaiah's time. And I think Isaiah was called to be a kind of underground prophet. Now I know it sounds weird, but the Book of Mormon is full of them. Okay, the Lehi runs away. Nephi runs away. Alma hides out by the waters. Abinadi preaches in disguise. Samuel sneaks up to the wall, says his bit, and runs away when they're shooting at him. That's who the Book of Mormon is about, is these kind of renegade refugee prophets. And I think Isaiah was that guy too. And I think Isaiah, his calling, if you will, was deliberately to write important sacred things in ways that most people would not understand, to preserve them. And after the break, we're going to read Matthew, where Jesus seems to have Jesus connecting himself to Isaiah along exactly those lines. So I don't know whether Isaiah thought it was going to happen in his day, or if he thought it would be, hey, in the far future. I don't know. But I don't think it did happen in his day.
Or is he saying that's what has to happen to fix this over here?
Could be. Now, by the way, Asherah did come back after Hezekiah, because he had to, because Josiah threw it right back out again, right? So, look, maybe, this is all maybe, no one should base their prayer and fasting activities on the basis, but maybe Manasseh, who's described as being horribly wicked, was not. That's the guy who's most of the time in between. Maybe he's the one who restored Asherah and traditional worship, and then Josiah came along and wiped it out again. We only have the documents written by people who were really big fans of Josiah, except we have the Book of Mormon. Well, let's take a break, and then we'll finish up.
Well, there's a lot of types of